All I learned is that I'm a descendant of slaves. And I felt like that. I felt ashamed because I didn't know my history. And for you to sit there and say, I feel proud. Why did you say that? Do you remember why?
Because that my ancestors went through, they must be pretty strong.
Oh, they must be pretty strong. Definitely strong and definitely brave, right? Mm-hmm. And again, that is running through your veins, that strength, that resistance, that fight, that love, and that carried you through to today. I love that, Emma. I love that. I love that about you, that you can look at something and you can reframe it and see the positivity in it and see the promise in it.
Welcome to Living in 3D Power. Discover your truth, discern your path, determine your power. I'm Dr. Amber Sessoms, and together, let's unlock our power, build authentic connections, and foster collective liberation. Hey y'all, we made it to episode 7 of Living in 3D Power, and this is the final episode of our Black History Month celebration, where we've been celebrating a phenomenal Black girl, an ancestor, and a present-day Black female hero. And today, in our final installment, we're going to be focusing on Emma's 5th strength, which is bravery. And we have some amazing people to talk about today on this episode. So I hope you'll stay tuned to listen to what Emma has to say, the wisdom, the nuggets she drops. And in particular, we're going to be focusing on something that she said that really resonated with me, is that bravery means sticking up for one another and for what's right. So when we think about our current climate and how we have so many organizations and individuals caving and going against what allegedly or apparently seemed to be what their values were, and now abandoning those values and really doing this self-betrayal to side with an administration that is very clearly against being inclusive. And I think about this in my own work. So I partner with organizations to really help them be values aligned. It is really important to me in my work. And I will not work with an organization that does not have courageous leaders. It is imperative for you to be a courageous leader. And what I usually see is everyone has a vision statement, usually a mission statement, something to that effect. And when I partner with them, one of the first questions I ask is, where are you in and out of alignment? So it sounds really great. Every district or organization usually says something to the effect of they are supporting everyone, or school districts in particular will usually say something to the effect of we are preparing for global leaders or learners. And my fear as a school psychologist is that this current administration is really going to double down on making sure that isn't the case. And this is what's happening, that it is very much a colonizer approach, taking the Gulf of Mexico and renaming it the Gulf of America, and saying that Canada would make a wonderful 51st state, has roots in colonialism and colonization. So that definitely is concerning to me as we navigate going into the next month, which is going to be Women's History Month. But as we prepare to officially celebrate the remaining days of Black history, we know that Black history is American history, which is why it's really going to be important today for you to stay tuned to listen to our conversation. And what we're going to be talking about is looking at activism, politics, and journalism from phenomenal children and women that have been a part of movement work for a very long time. And thinking about these women, it's going to be Paula Young Shelton, who is the child of Andrew Young, who was arm in arm with Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in the civil rights struggle. You might have seen him most recently if you watched President Jimmy Carter's funeral. He gave the eulogy. And thinking about Paula, she was 4 years old when they started this movement work. I think they lived in Chicago and they moved down to Atlanta. So I think it's important to think and hear from a child's perspective, which is the whole nature and point of this podcast, is so that you can get a different lens, a different perspective, and have that intergenerational dialogue. And then we're going to be moving on to our ancestor, who is none other than Shirley Chisholm. We're going to be talking about her famous saying, if you don't give me a seat at the table, I'll just bring a folding chair. And it's such a great saying. And thinking about in this moment, I have a former mentor who would ask, who has given you permission? Do you give yourself permission or do you wait for someone else? And I remember in that moment, I had this really tremendous sense of resolve that I give myself permission. I don't need to wait for someone to give me permission. And some of us are waiting for others to give us permission. And that permission will not come in a lot of instances because the way that the system is set up is to keep you to playing small. So if you're waiting for someone that upholds the system, and I'm not even talking about people that have the power, quote unquote power. I'm talking about those who perpetuate the system, who play the game. So people that could look like me, other Black individuals that say, just play the game to get along. If you saw the halftime show, which is reportedly the highest watched halftime show in history, you could see Samuel L. Jackson's role as Uncle Sam. And it was such a pivotal role. And thinking about what he's saying to Kendrick as he's performing and saying, when he was doing the SZA songs and the more radio air popular songs, it was like, yes, that's what you need to do. Don't be too quote unquote ghetto. And this is sometimes what we do generationally, because what we have done in older generations, particularly within the Black community, because we know the risks. We have been trying for generations to keep ourselves safe. That's why we have to have the conversations with our youth about police brutality and what do you do if you're stopped by the police, because we know the harm and the dangers there. It also comes from thinking about dressing in your Sunday best. I remember this as a single mom, going out and making sure that I looked the part, that my dress was always intact. I had the shoes, I had all the things, even though I didn't have any money. I wanted to look like you needed to give me dignity instead of recognizing that the dignity was inherent. And that stems from the Sunday's best. It stems from the culture of, if I look the part, if I am professional, quote unquote professional, then I will be respected. And what we find is that's generally not the case. So thinking about living in this multiracial democracy, I've been thinking about this recently and wondering, what does freedom really look like for people that look like me? Thinking about the commentary with Serena Williams doing the sea walk on stage, the petty move, but also the freedom move there. When she did it in 2012, after she won in Wimbledon, she was condemned and they said it was completely inappropriate and she desecrated Wimbledon by doing the sea walk. And all these years later, doing it on stage at the Super Bowl, the world's largest stage, and thinking about all that she had to endure going through that because of the color of her skin. Yes, she has all these accolades and success, but it wasn't without racism. It wasn't without misogyny. And Emma and I are going to talk about that today, and thinking about these phenomenal Black women who changed the game and created a legacy and a foundation for us to stand on. So we have Paula Young, as I said before, Shirley Chisholm, the first Black woman elected to Congress and the first one to run for president. So she laid the foundation. I think that was in 72. I can't even imagine. When I think about how much harm and vitriol came to Kamala Harris, can you imagine in 72 running for president as a Black woman? The level of bravery that she had to have to endure that. And she made a way. And she paved a way for so many of us, thinking about how do we get in these legislative seats and in the Senate and in Congress. And then last but not least, Nikole Hannah-Jones. And last time I read y'all a passage from 1619 Project. And I also have on, if y'all can see, my Ida B. Wells pen, who was a journalist during the period where the country was terrorizing Black people after Reconstruction and doing heinous lynchings. So those are the people that we're going to talk about. And I hope that you enjoy. I hope you get some insights and some nuggets from Emma as she unpacks her perspective on history and her place in it. And what I love most, and I hope you can hear this and you can feel this, is that she has a tremendous sense of pride in her ancestors. And what I love about that is that I recall in school really only learning that I was a descendant of slaves. And there was a tremendous shame that came with that. But I remember talking to Emma prior to recording. We were just talking about what she learns in school. And kudos to her school, because they are definitely being culture responsive. And more, she's telling me, oh, I already learned about that. And I love that, because the things I'm introducing to her or something that she's already learned before, which was not the case when I was in school. So kudos to this primarily white district that is being culture responsive and making sure that my little Black girl is seen, but also that the white students are disrupting this narrative that Black people are inferior. Because if they can learn the history, we can stop this incessant need to look at us as we are subhuman. So I love that. It's not just for my edification as a Black person, it's also for the edification of our entire country. So if you are white, Asian, Indian, whatever identity group that you belong to, there is a universal language of anti-Blackness that we have to dismantle, not only as a country, but as a world. And we can do our part because we're not born that way, right? And the more that we can integrate different stories, different histories, because it's not just Black history, it's not just AAPI history, it's not just LGBTQ history, it's not just disability. It is our full history. We are all interconnected. The more we do that, the more that we can change the lens and disrupt the narrative of others. And we can lift up this generation as they have come out the womb to be. And we have just done our part as adults and as a system to dehumanize them. And this is the work, y'all. So the attacks on education are real and they're purposeful, because we know that that is a sorting system, that is where we can teach very much a white supremacist ideology that comes across as very mundane. Right, we're not doing anything wrong. This is just the history that we're teaching, or, it's not in our history books, or this is what I was taught when I was growing up. What's the problem with it? I'm not saying anything negative, but the more that you don't include us, there's also a lesson in that. When we're erased, what is the lesson in not seeing myself, not having a mirror, and then my white counterparts always having a mirror? What does it teach you about whiteness? What does it teach you about your identity as a white individual? And what does it teach you if you don't have that identity? There is a lesson in the erasure. There is a lesson in the invisibility. And there's also a lesson in the perpetuation and amplification of one piece of our whole entire story. So these are the things, again, that Emma and I continue to engage in, just like I do with my other daughters and just in our household and other kids in general, because it's important conversations. I hope it continues to encourage you to have conversations with the youth in your life and to really sit and be still and listen. So with that said, let's listen to the segment with Emma.
It's me, it's me, it's me. It's me, it's me, it's me. Hey everybody, it's me, Emma. Welcome back to Living in 3D Power, and today we're doing my fifth trait, bravery.
Bravery, the fifth and final trait of our Black History Month celebration. And bravery defined by VIA under the umbrella. So remember, everything has a virtue. The virtue for bravery is courage, and they define it as taking a stand, facing fear, and advocating for what's right. And how would you describe bravery in a sentence or a few words?
I think sticking up for one another for what's right.
Oh, I actually like that. And let's see, like VIA says something similar to that. So they say bravery is not shrinking from threat, challenge, difficulty, or pain. Speaking up, as you said, for what's right, even if there's opposition. Acting on convictions, even if unpopular. And it includes physical bravery, but it's not limited to that. So I love the part about acting on the convictions, even when it's not popular, especially what's going on right now in the world, right? You have a lot of companies and organizations, Target, Walmart, Amazon, all these companies that are folding on their DEI efforts, which means that they are making spaces that are inclusive for people that look like you and me. And they're folding on that because the administration is, as you used the language before, bullying them into doing this. And it's really going against what they say are their values. So it's really hard in this day and age to really stick with your convictions, because you have a lot of people that will use the ultimate force and a lot of bullying to get you to break. And that's what's happening, unfortunately, with some of these companies. But we have to hold strong as a people, as individuals, and even these organizations when they have these values to say, I'm going to align with my values and I'm not going to back down, because if I do, I'm betraying myself and I'm betraying my customers that I'm serving. So does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. So as we're wrapping up our series, we have, again, a child figure, an ancestor, and we have a living legend. And the first person we're going to talk about is a child figure. And people might not know too much about her. And I'm not sure if I got you this book or who got you this book. It might have been for Christmas. Or did you get it at the book fair?
No, I didn't get this at the book fair.
Okay, so I think someone bought it for you for Christmas or your birthday or something of that nature. But the person on the cover, you want to show people what's on the cover if you happen to be watching us. What's the title of the book?
Children of the Civil Rights Movement.
And who is the author of the book?
Paula Young Shelton.
So Paula Young Shelton is the daughter of civil rights activist, I would say Reverend Andrew Young. And he was one of Martin Luther King Jr.'s right-hand men during the civil rights period when they were really protesting. So this woman grew up around all these amazing civil rights leaders during that time. And she wrote a book about that from the lens of being a 4-year-old in the civil rights struggle. So let's check out the book. I think there's a page that we tagged that you can read. I really love this perspective because it really shows that it doesn't matter what age you are, that you can be a part of the movement work and you have an experience that you need to share as well.
My first protest. In our new home in Atlanta, Jim Crow was everywhere. At first, I thought Jim Crow was a big black crow that squawked anywhere a black person tried to get a good seat. Squawk, squawk, squawk. You can't sit there. But really, he was a white man who lived long ago. He painted his face black and made fun of African Americans. He didn't sound very nice to me. I guess that's why they named the wall after him, because they weren't very nice either.
Do you remember seeing some of those documentaries or images of white people that painted their faces black? I remember you're like, why would they do that? And why are they making us look like that? Yeah, that's a cool picture. That looks like that's her. And then what's flying? So a crow. So she's envisioning that's what she thought it was, and then she learned very quickly what it actually was. I think they lived in Chicago or around there, and then during the civil rights struggle, they moved down south, and it was a very different experience for her because down south, segregation was legal, and you had the white water fountain and the black water fountain, and to grow up like that at the age of 4 and seeing that I can't be around people that look different than me because they think that there's something wrong with me had to be really hard. So I love the perspective that she gives here, and I think she talks about on the next page even that they went to a restaurant and they were in this fancy lobby and they weren't allowed to eat in there, and she said it was actually her first protest because she was so tired and so hungry that she sat on the floor, and you can see the picture there. She sat on the floor and she was having a temper tantrum, which is pretty common for that age. But she looks back on it now and says, that was actually my first protest. It was my first sit-in. So the lunch counter sit-ins, because she didn't understand why they couldn't be served. And when you're that little, you're just hungry and you want to eat. So I appreciate that she gives this perspective, and she gives a caveat in the beginning, and she says, it's from my perspective as a 4-year-old and what I can recall and what people told me. So I think it's also important that we lean on what adults tell us from when we were little, and we don't really ask the kids what they learned or what they were going through back then. And I think that's a very important perspective that we miss out on, especially in the civil rights struggle. We think it was all the adults. And we know a big part of it, and a big part of the success was because Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was very strategic And he knew that if they could get media coverage of these kids being bullied, like you said, hosed down, attacked by dogs, that the world was going to have a problem with that. And these kids were super brave, like college students, high school students, and they wanted to be a part of this freedom movement because they knew it was wrong, and they had a legacy that they built on. So thinking about her as a 4-year-old, a daughter of the civil rights movement, sometimes we forget about them. I think about Dr. Bernice King, who was young when her father was assassinated, and she's still a part of that fight running the King Center. And I remember hearing her speak about a year or so ago, and she says, it's a big shoe to fill. Can you imagine that your dad is Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and there's a tremendous amount of pressure on her, but she's still a human being. But she took on that mantle, and she built, and she's building the beloved community, and we're a part of that community. Okay, so in terms of Paula Young Shelton, what I want to ask you is, would you have been brave enough to march for justice as a kid like Paula did? Why or why not? The age of 4.
Yes, because she had the people that she loved and trusted with her.
And I think you said something really important, that she loved and trusted, right? If we're going to do something that's scary, or we have things that are unknown to us, having people that love us and that can protect us is going to be really key. Everyone deserves that, right? Even when we're facing harm's way, I can do it even if I'm a little afraid, because I know that you have my back, and I know that you love me, and I also know that it's the right thing to do. So I think that's really important too. So some other things about her which I think are really important is that she's still an educator. I think she's either a kindergarten or first grade teacher, which is pretty awesome, and maybe in the DC area. And she participated in historic marches as a child. In the book, they show an image of her, not an actual image, but a picture of her being held by her mother as they were walking, because she would get tired. They would march for miles, and as a 4-year-old marching, so they would hold her and then they would pass her around to other people that were marching. So she had a huge community of people that cared about her. So I think that really helped her to be brave. And she also continues to do the advocacy work today. So I think it's really awesome. And I didn't want to forget, because I think we've done a really good job of making sure that we give credit to the illustrators as well. And I think it's Raul Colon. So I love this, again, from the perspective of a youth, a young person. And she has some awesome things in the back here about more people in the book. So Andrew Young, again, she says, my daddy was a young minister with the National Council of Churches when he and my mama, Jean Childs Young, got the calling to help my Uncle Martin shape the American civil rights movement. So she called Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King her uncle. He wasn't her real uncle, but you know how in Black culture we'd be like, cousin, and it's not really our cousin. But so could you imagine your uncle being Reverend King? So she had that to support her and keep her strong and brave. So who is the ancestor that we're going to talk about today in your Young, Gifted, and Black book?
Shirley Chisholm. She was born on November 30th, 1924, and died on January 2005. And she was born in Brooklyn, New York, USA. Shirley Chisholm was the first American congresswoman in the U.S.
Awesome. And what's the quote in the book?
If they don't bring you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair.
I love that quote. For adults, what we mean by that is that's where the power lies, at the table, and I need to get a seat at the table so that my voice can be heard in the decision making. And she's saying, they're not going to make a seat for me at this table, so you know what I'm going to do? Bring my own, and I'm going to bring a folding chair with me. And that's how resolute she was about power to the people and doing work on behalf of the people. So she was the first Black woman, like you said, elected to Congress in 1968. And you know what also she did? Talk about bravery. She was the first Black woman to run for president in 1972. Now, you know what went down with Kamala Harris running for president as a Black woman and a Southeast Asian woman. But she ran even though people told her she had no chance, showing incredible bravery by breaking down barriers and demanding change in a system that didn't want to include her. And she did it anyway. And because she did this, she's paved the way right now in Congress in Delaware. They have 2 black women that are actually senators at the same time for the first time in history, Senator Lisa Blunt Rochester and Angela also Brooks, both of Delaware. So that's amazing. That's not far from us in Pennsylvania. Okay, so you talked about the quote about bringing a folding chair. She's like, I don't care if you're not going to make room, I'll make room for myself. So another popular thing she said was unbought, unbossed. And she talked about that because she refused to be controlled by these political mastermind campaigns. So when you run for office, you have to raise thousands and millions of dollars if you're running for president. And where do you think you get that money? Big corporations. So the Elon Musks of the world, right? They give you millions and millions of dollars. But you think they're just going to give you that and say, here, you can do whatever you want with that. They're going to have an opinion about what you can do and what you can say with that money. And that's why she said unbought, unbossed, because she didn't want to listen to those people. So what do you think it means to be unbought and unbossed from your perspective?
I think it means you can be yourself and don't let anyone else tell you if you can't be yourself, because you can be yourself.
That's the most important thing, right? We get so exhausted when we're pretending to be someone else. Be who you are. Unbought, unbossed. I think I need a t-shirt. You want to get a t-shirt? Okay. So the last person, and I had to make some room on our coffee table here because I have several of her books, is the one and only Nikole Hannah-Jones. And you have a book too. So what book do you have of hers?
Born on Water, on the Water.
Born on the Water by Nikole Hannah-Jones, and is it Renee Watson, illustrations by Nicholas Smith. This is a beautiful book. So this was the kid version of her 1619 project, which became an instant hit. And guess what, y'all? I have the original newspaper from the New York Times, and it's dated Sunday, August 18th, 2019. I remember when this became a thing. So I'm still in the school district, and I hear about the 1619, and I'm like, I got to get my hands on this special edition. And she was giving them away to educators for free. New York Times did that. So I have an original copy, and I'm a little bummed because when I met her at her book talk, I didn't get this one signed, but my friend who is also an educator brought his, and I was like, darn it, that was such a good idea to bring that. But this is where it all started. It started with this special edition and then moved on to this amazing book. And I talked about in a previous episode that I took this book to the book signing, and my friend was laughing at me. Y'all see, I love to tab my books. And she was like, I mean, what page didn't you tab? Because when I went to get my book signed, y'all see it signed here with my name to Amber by Nikole Hannah-Jones. She was beaming because I had all these pages tabbed, and she said she absolutely loves seeing her books tabbed, right? So she's a journalist, and she got a lot of heat for this book, though. A whole lot of heat, but you see how many pages I starred and tabbed because it's super important. And then her most recent thing that she just released, and I wish we could have gotten to New York to see the museum exhibit, is this beautiful coffee table book, 1619, A Visual Experience. And it is amazing. I absolutely love this. I mean, look at this with the cornrows. So a portrait of a mother and her baby in New York City in the 1980s. She has artifacts in here. And I think what I love these pictures. Look at these pictures of black people with the American flag. I think it's just the counter narrative to what America should be and what it is. So when you see a black person with the flag, I think it really makes you think about, are we living up to our values? Which is what the whole purpose of her book was really about. And what I want you to do is, I'm going to give this back to you because, oh no, I'll read it. How about I'll read it? But she wrote to you, to little Emma, so you have your own signed copy, y'all. I think Emma has about maybe 4 or 5 signed copies of books. So you have this one, you have a book by Dr. Bernice King, signed a book for you, and a couple other books. But I love this part of it because in school, I remember JoJo did this. I don't think Maya did it because of COVID, but they have you go and interview a relative, and it's very much a white-centered question where they're asking you, go and ask them about, when did you decide to come to this country as a family, your ancestors? And I remember JoJo asking my mom that question. My mom was like, what? She's like, what do you mean? I was like, yeah, we didn't decide to come here, right? We were captured, we were enslaved. So thinking about sometimes the questions that we ask in school are harmful when we don't think about other people's experiences. That's not culturally responsive. So I'm not going to go in a classroom and ask students, and if a student happens to be a person of color, when did you choose to come to this country? Especially if you're African American, the majority of us did not choose to come here, right? So she starts out the book and she says, questions. My teacher gives us an assignment. Who are you? She asks. Trace your roots. Draw a flag that represents your ancestral land. Most of my classmates can count back many generations and learn about the countries where their families came from. They draw their flags, but I leave my paper blank. I do not know where I begin my story. At home, Grandma asks, how was school? I tell her about the assignment, how I couldn't finish it, how I can only count back 3 generations here in this country, where my parents, my grandparents, and my great-grandparents were born. But before that, I do not know. I tell her that I am ashamed. Grandma gathers the whole family, says, come, let me tell you our beginning. Let me tell you where we're from. I mean, beautiful pictures. Look at those pictures. What Grandma tells me, they say our people were born on the water, but our people had a home, a place, a land before they were sold. 400 years ago, in 1619, our ancestors were taken and brought here on ships called the White Lion, a whole year before the Mayflower arrived. But before that dreadful voyage, there was a time when they did not pray for freedom. There was a time when they did not sing about overcoming. Their story does not begin with whips and change. They had a home, a place, a land, a beginning. Their story is our story. Before they were enslaved, they were free. And I think that's such an important thing about origin story, because we think our story starts from what? Well, you learn in school usually, like we start from enslavement. And she's saying before all of that trauma and brutality, we had a different origin story that we don't really have access to because we don't know our history. But I love this. I think it's absolutely imperative for Black families to have a book like this, because I remember I asked you a question recently about how do you feel when you learn about slavery in school? And what did you say? Do you remember what you said to me?
They don't really. They teach us a different way.
What do they call them? Servants? Oh, that bothers me, right? We don't use, so we say like euphemistic terms, like we use a softer language to make it sound like it was something nice, that we were just willingly doing this work and we got paid for it. It's so harmful to use that language. But the other thing that you said to me that really stopped me in my tracks is that when you learn about that stuff, you said it makes you proud. Do you remember saying that? And I think that is such a powerful thing because, right? I remember being your age and all I learned is that I'm a descendant of slaves. And I felt like that. I felt ashamed because I didn't know my history. And for you to sit there and say, I feel proud. Why did you say that? Do you remember why?
Because that my ancestors went through, they must be pretty strong.
Oh, they must be pretty strong. Definitely strong and definitely brave, right? Mm-hmm. And again, that is running through your veins, that strength, that resistance, that fight, that love. And that carried you through to today. I love that, Emma. I love that. I love that about you, that you can look at something and you can reframe it and see the positivity in it and see the promise in it. I think that's super important. So she's a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist and creator of the 1619 Project, which tells the true story of how Black people helped build America. And this is when the clapback, this is when the pushback came from the whole government being like, we got to shut this whole thing down, anti-CRT movements, because she was causing us to look at not the Mayflower when you learn about the Pilgrims coming and having cornucopias with the indigenous people.
Yeah, they didn't. They killed them.
Right. Intentionally killed them, right? Took their land. And because of that, what's happening to our planet? They were stewards, and they are stewards of the land.
They helped us.
They helped, right? Super nice.
They killed the trees because they didn't want to have wildfires, because they knew it would happen from the fungus and the mildew that was building up on the trees.
Oh, you're just teaching me something, because I didn't even know that. Where'd you learn that?
School.
Oh, you learned it in school? Listen, kudos to your teachers. Was that Mrs. G?
It was a video.
I absolutely love that they're teaching you. This is what I'm talking about, people, when we're being culturally responsive in schools. And Emma doesn't go to a predominantly black, brown, anything district. Like, she's one of, I mean, who else in your class? Not saying names, but
4 other people.
4 other people of color in your class. Your district is about 1.8% black. So thinking about that you are learning things about other cultures and learning how they're stewards of the land, especially indigenous people, I think is super important. And that you are not just learning that we were these happy little slaves, which is so harmful, right? We resisted every step of the way, which I think is super important too. When you say you were proud of the strength that we had, the strength is that we also resisted. We understood we didn't need to be in captivity and that we deserve to be free. And because of that, that strength is in you, right? In the marrow of your bones. So the question I want to ask you is, why do you think some people don't want to talk about racism or black history? Why did they come back so hard on Nikole Hannah-Jones and just speaking the truth and telling our story about our true roots as American people? Why do you think they don't want to talk about racism?
They don't want to talk about racism because it makes them feel bad to hear what their ancestors did to our ancestors.
So when you're saying they, who are you referring to?
White people.
Yeah, and I think you're spot on with that, because thinking about this push and what's going on now, getting rid of DEI, getting rid of the books and all of these things, and literally the legislation they're trying to pass because white men are feeling like they're being subjected to racism and sexism because they're white cisgender men, taking the language and flipping it and trying to say it's actually me that's being hurt, which I talked about last episode on my private conversation where I said in 1619 they talk about George Washington said that we are actually slaves to England. And they use that language, you're furrowing your brow, because what do you mean? You literally enslaved people. How are you saying you're slaves? But we know the power of language. People in power are always going to take the language that's meant for good if they're evil, right? If they're not about actually
Evil.
making and holding true to American values, they're going to take that, or what the American values should be, and they're going to twist it for their own gain, which is why they attacked her so much, because she held a mirror up. And just as black people, just us simply existing, Emma, is a mirror to whiteness and the harm what whiteness can be if you believe that you're white, versus that you understand that we should be a multiracial democracy, meaning that I should be learning about everyone and everyone's differences, and it's not taking away from me. It's just amazing because we're all different, and that should be celebrated. But we're living in a world that says whiteness is supreme. And guess what? That hurts literally everyone, even white people, because if you go around thinking that you're better simply because of the color of your skin,
You're not.
you're not, and also leaves a blind spot because you grow up hardening your heart to people that are different than you, and also have this false sense of entitlement that the world deserves to give you everything. And none of those things are true. So I just think it's really important that you're saying, you're not going to erase me because you feel uncomfortable about learning about the truth of who we are. You don't have to feel bad about that. Yes, you can say that was your ancestors, but also check in with yourself. If you feel bad, if you feel ashamed about that, process that thing. Because what you're doing is creating, I remember me being little, I felt bad about myself because all I thought was I was descended of slaves, which is why I was so intentional with y'all to be like, that is not your origin story. And I didn't even have a book like this growing up. So for Nikole Hannah-Jones to make a book like this for you, that you can pass on to, if you decide to have children, your grandchildren. Oh, excuse me, you are. You're going to give me some grandbabies. Why, thank you. I think it's really important, so it's powerful that she fought against everyone coming against her, telling her to be quiet and to stop. And she said, absolutely not. I'm going to keep going. Okay. So those are our 3 amazing women as we wrap up our Black History Month celebration. And a final question I want to ask you. So we talked about Paula Young Shelton, Shirley Chisholm, and Nikole Hannah-Jones. They all showed bravery in different ways. Paula as a child marching for civil rights, Shirley by demanding a seat at the table in politics, and Nikole by telling the truth about Black history even when people tried to silence her. So what do you think all 3 of these women had in common when it comes to bravery? How can you use their stories to be brave in your own life?
I think I could be brave in my own life by not letting anyone else tell me what to do and be myself.
I think that's the most important thing. Be yourself. And don't listen to people saying you should be ashamed. Ashamed of what? Because what do you talk about? I have beautiful brown skin.
Yes.
I have beautiful hair. I have my strength of my ancestors running through my veins. All of that. So, final words to the people as we wrap up our Black History Month celebration. What do you have to say? What nugget, what wisdom do you have to drop for the people?
Be yourself.
Point blank, period. Be yourself. I love it.
All right, y'all, we are back. And I hope you enjoyed that segment as Emma and I discussed Paula Young Shelton, Shirley Chisholm, and Nikole Hannah-Jones. And just to recap the nuggets and the wisdom that Emma was dropping, especially thinking about Paula Young Shelton, what she said was, when I asked her about, would you have been that brave at that age? And what she said was amazing. She said, yes, I would have marched like Paula because she had people she loved and trusted with her. And that was really key for me, thinking about when we build community or we think we have a community, if you don't have trust, that's not a community. That's not safety. So sometimes we're a part, quote unquote, a part of a system. So within our organizations, within the communities that we live, where we work, and it's not truly a community, because if you do not feel safe, which is a basic fundamental human right, that's not community. So there's some work that I do with clients sometimes, and it really focuses on who are your people. And sometimes it's a really sobering reality for people, because they'll be like, I have all these friends, I know all these people, like I'm a part of all these organizations. But when we really drill down, who would you feel comfortable with sharing this information with? Or who do you know without a shadow of a doubt would have your back if this happened? Or even thinking about things that might harm your identity, who would have your back and speak up on your behalf? That list, I'm telling you, gets mighty small. And sometimes it's really hard for people to understand that they can look like they're a part of a group, but they're really not. And I think of Vivek Murthy's work, where he's talking about the loneliness epidemic, that we can look like we're in community with people and we could have all these people around us and be the life of the party, and deep down inside, we're really lonely. So I think about when she said that she would feel loved and trusted, how important it is. Those are basic fundamental things that we deserve and need. And particularly in what's going on in this country right now, there is a dearth of that. So this is why we really have to lean in and really find true community, really find a beloved community more than ever, so that we can feel loved and feel safe, because we deserve that. And our bodies right now are so dysregulated with everything that's happening, that's been happening with COVID and ongoing, that we really need to have these people so that we can settle ourselves and soothe our bodies and get to a baseline and be well. So I really encourage you to think about who are the people that you're in community with. And if you don't have people where you feel 100% loved and safe, where can you go to build that? Because you 100% deserve that, because you are a human being. Okay. And also thinking about Shirley Chisholm and what Emma said when we were talking about the Unbought and Unbossed. She said being unbought and unbossed means you can be yourself and not let anyone tell you you can't be yourself, because you can be yourself, okay? And what I love about that is I call myself an authenticity architect, and authenticity is one of my core values. If I can't be myself, that lets me know that I don't feel safe. I'm just being really conscious of how I'm showing up in spaces, because I understand my positionality as a Black woman and how I enter spaces. So I have to be cognizant and not be hyper vigilant all the time about, am I showing up this way so I can be perceived a certain way and not as society perceives me? It's exhausting, y'all. So the more that I can let go of the societal views and stories about me, the more I can be like myself. And part of the letting go is building up and reaffirming what I know to be true about me, which is part of why history is so important, because it tells us the truth of who we are. And again, thinking about Emma, thinking about being a descendant of enslaved people, she has that strength within her, and she's proud of the strength and fortitude that they had to survive. And now she's a manifestation of that. And I love that, because part of the work and history is reframing what we are taught by white supremacist ideology, by a Eurocentric culture, is that whiteness is supreme. And all of us learn that, and all of us have to unlearn that. Some of us choose to really actively unlearn that. And for me, it's really important for the people in my life and for myself to unlearn those unhealthy narratives that are steeped in keeping me small and shrinking and keeping me believing that this is just as good as it can get, right? It doesn't allow you to freedom dream. So when you can get beyond the bounds of systems and thinking like that can't happen, or this is how it's always been, it's always going to be like this, you will stay stuck there. But the more that we engage with our youth, the more they can lead the way and tell us, oh, so many things are possible. And the more that we tap into them, we can see that we were once like that, and we can reclaim that as well. So I love that she said, you have to be yourself. Authenticity, y'all, is key. And I work with adults. I'm talking people that are much older than me that have no clue who they are, that have always been a boxed in version of themselves. And a lot of my work oftentimes can be dealing with letting you out of the box. Who are you at your core? And with that work, it comes looking at your values, your strengths, what we've been going through with Emma, and your needs, and how do you nourish your needs. And when you can do those three, what I call VSNs, your values, your strengths, and your needs, you get more aligned with who you truly are, and that internal compass will start working in your favor, because you know what's for you and what's not for you. And am I aligned with myself? And how earlier we talked about being values aligned and how I do with that with organizations. That work starts with you first. So I always say the individual informs the collective. So if you're not doing your individual work, you're bringing this broken or bifurcated version of yourself into the spaces that you're in. And the more you can release what you've been contained to be, or that you've been numb to not even exploring, the more you're going to be full of yourself and who you actually were put on this earth to be. And when you walk in your fullness, it's going to give license for other people to do the same. It is so key, y'all, to your liberation. All right. And so the last thing we talked about with Emma was Nikole Hannah-Jones. And Emma, when I asked her about why do you think we don't talk about Black history in schools in general? And she said they don't want to talk about racism, they being white people, because it makes them feel bad about what their ancestors did to our ancestors. And that was just so poignant, because this is coming from a little girl. And this is literally what I hear from adults, particularly white people, that there's a shame and a stigma attached to them because they don't want to be associated with what their ancestors did. I remember being in conversations with grown men, white men, and them saying, that was the period of time then. That was just how it was back then. That was my ancestor. It had nothing to do with me. And my response usually is, there were also people that looked like you, that looked like your ancestors, that absolutely did not perpetuate that, did not engage in the harm and the enslavement of people that look like me. So when we have these narratives and these stories, one, that's just how it was back then. That's just the culture. And we don't know the truth of white abolitionists. So I'm not far from Thaddeus Stevens College and Technology. Thaddeus Stevens was a prominent white abolitionist in Lancaster County in Pennsylvania. And when we don't know that history, or you think about the civil rights movement, how you'll see the pictures where we shall overcome where they're arm in arm. Oftentimes you only see Black people arm in arm, and they will purposely not show you other images where there were also white people in this fight. Also, y'all, why do you think Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated? The minute that he started partnering with workers and unions and looking at the conditions that they were experiencing and white people that were experiencing poverty, he became a major issue because he built community. He found a commonality in the humanity and a dehumanization of a people, not just one group of people that looked a certain way, but when you can say, here once again, there's a system. When we can get back to the system, this is when people's eyes are opened on all sides and they can see that they've been a cog in this wheel. So that's the enlightenment that has to continue. And I think again about Lamar, I saw someone's commentary again on Samuel L. Jackson being Uncle Sam and her getting really emotional because there's one where there's 4 quadrants and it's really mimicking incarceration, like being in a prison yard. And before that, I think Kendrick goes back to rapping more, quote unquote, as Uncle Sam, played by Samuel L. Jackson, was saying, ghetto. And when he's with community, with people, other Black men, he says, oh, something to the effect of he broke the code or the culture code and deducting one life. And just sitting with that. We know historically, and I remember my colleague when we would work together, I worked in a primarily white district, and for a long time I was the only Black woman there. There was one other Black woman that they confused and thought we looked alike, and she was old enough to be my mother. We didn't look anything alike, but you know how that goes. And when he came, I think at that point, there might have been 4 of us in the entire building of maybe 120, 160 staff. And he was a history teacher, and he would say jokingly, now, you know, there's too many of us together. You know, this was against the law back in the day. There is some truth to that, though. When there's too many of us, quote unquote, too many of us, it becomes a fear among power, and they have to dismantle it. So him saying taking one life is a tragic reality. If that is physically, if that is spiritually. So we have to remember who we are, reclaiming ourselves as whole human beings, that we build community, that we stay sane within community, and that we can lean on each other when we need it. So I'm thinking about this in particular as it's a requirement for bravery, right? So thinking about Paula, who had the support of her family, and that helped her to be brave, to Shirley, who had her community to enter into politics, and Nikole Hannah-Jones, who had generations. So what I love about her work is that she focuses on her ancestors, and it's in her blood, as Emma said, or it's in my belly, or what she say, it's in my veins, or it's brain food, all of the things that she says that fortify her. That Nikole is coming from a perspective that she is a truth teller. She is on Instagram and Blue Sky and all the other platforms. I think it's Ida B. Wells, but it's spelled differently, because she's honoring Ida B. Wells and her work and how she laid a legacy of journalism and truth telling. So she's bringing all that and fortifying it. And something I just want to leave us with, because what Emma said about our white counterparts don't want to talk about this history and why it's being so attacked, because it makes them feel bad. And thinking about that, right? How I grew up and how so many other people that aren't feeling seen in history or in the classroom mathematics, all these other different facets of education aren't feeling seen, and how the erasure is a story in itself. Nikole writes this in her 1619 project book, which is the chapter is democracy. And I absolutely had to sit with this. And she talks about, they say our people were born on the water. And I think this is where she got some of that language to write her children's book that I discussed with Emma earlier. But she says, when it occurred, no one can say for certain. Perhaps it was in the 2nd week or the 3rd, but surely by the 4th, when they had not seen their land or any land for so many days that they had lost count. It was after fear had turned to despair, and despair to resignation, and resignation to an abiding understanding. The teal eternity of the Atlantic Ocean had severed them so completely from what had once been their home that it was as if nothing had ever existed before, as if everything and everyone they cherished had simply vanished from the earth. They were no longer Ubuntu or Akan or Fulani, these men and women from many different nations, all shackled together in the suffocating hull of the ship. They were one people now. Just a few months earlier, they'd had families and farms and lives and dreams. They'd been free. They had names, of course, but their enslavers had not bothered to record them. They had been made black by those people who believed that they themselves were white. And where they were heading Black equaled slave, and slavery in America required turning human beings into property by stripping them of every element that made them individuals. This process was called seasoning, in which people stolen from Western and Central Africa were forced, often through torture, to stop speaking their native tongue and practicing their native religions. But as the sociologist Glenn Bracey writes, out of the ashes of white denigration, we gave birth to ourselves. For as much as white people tried to pretend, Black people were not chattel. And so the process of seasoning, instead of erasing identity, served as an opposite purpose. In the void, we forged new cultures, all our own. I think that is just so important and so beautiful. And that lives in Emma, where she's like, I don't feel shame. I feel the strength of my ancestors because what they endured, and I'm still standing, and that is running through her veins. So I appreciate that she can help me reframe and go back to that little Amber and say, you've always had that strength in you, and there was no part of you that ever needed to feel shame. I hope you enjoyed this series. I thought it was really important to sit down with Emma and have these conversations. But as always, please subscribe to her YouTube channel. You can see shorts and Substack where you can see the full episode. Please leave a comment and review. We greatly appreciate it. And also, if you go on our website, I will put that in the show notes. You can actually submit questions that you would like me to ask Emma. But as we head into the final days of this month of Black History, we know that Black History is not just going to be in February. It is going to be full year round, that we will do our part as a community to make sure that we do not do these one-offs, that we are not performative, that we are fully integrating the full breadth of American culture and all of its glory and gory. All of it is needed. All of it needs to be spoken, but the latter part of it, the goriness, the details, will not continue to cause shame on anyone. If you do feel shame that your family enslaved people that look like me, what do you do now to move that trauma and metabolize it out of your body so that you don't get stuck in the shame? What do we do as Black people? The trauma that we've endured in this country, to metabolize it out of our body so that we do not hold on to that. But what can you do? You can build community. So again, I'll put links in my show notes. The Substack community is a community that is open to anyone, and also forming a community called the 3D Power Collective for women of the African diaspora, because now more than ever, we need to be in community and understand the origin of us. It was born on the water. And that water is a reclamation and a rebirth. So y'all take care, and I'll see you next week.